Welcome everyone to episode 1 of Chat Sports Science. In today's episode, we're going to look at Vicon camera setup with our resident expert, Shane Boyle. Before we get started with Vicon, we want to find out some information about Shane and how he came to use Vicon in his current PhD role. So Shane, can you tell us some information about your background and how you came to study sports science and use Vicon?
Yep, so essentially I played sport obviously from a relatively young age, so I played predominantly cricket, rugby and soccer. Played at a relatively high level but not enough to go professional. However, that did ignite my passion to look into performance and injury prevention protocols within a research perspective. So I firstly undertook my exercise and sports science degree, and about early on in my third year I approached my biomechanics lecturer. She had a project going looking at how we can improve the accuracy of the short serve in badminton players, and we used Vicon to basically analyse those movement patterns and identify which movement patterns resulted in more accurate serves.
Awesome. And can you explain to everyone what your current PhD project is and how you're using Vicon in your current project?
So essentially my PhD project is looking at the acute effects of fatigue in soccer players. So what we're having a look at is looking at their sprinting technique, their jumping technique, and how they produce horizontal force and how that might affect hamstring function. So what we're basically doing is getting them to do the sprinting and jumping protocols. We then fatigue them and then we're retesting them, and we want to see how that might affect hamstring injury risk in soccer players.
Okay, great. Alright guys, up next we're going to look at Vicon camera setup.
So one of the primary things to consider when placing your cameras is to ensure that at least 2 cameras at any one time is going to be able to see the reflective markers that you're going to be placing on the specific anatomical landmarks. So what you need to consider is that the different joints that you're going to put these markers on and how each of these cameras are going to see it. So for example, we generally put 2 markers on the ACEs, or the front anatomical positions of the pelvis, and if we're going to get someone to do a jump or acceleration, they might actually flex at the hip, in which case some of the cameras that are put on the higher end of the tripods might not actually see these markers. So one of the things to consider is the different ranges of motion that they're going to be moving through in each of these actions, and whether there's going to be a minimum of 2 cameras that are going to be able to see each marker that you place in these anatomical joints at any one time. So the way I recommend you do it is you take each cable that you're going to be plugging into each camera, and you plug it first into the GigaNet box. So these GigaNet boxes you should have standard obviously when you purchase a Vicon system. So you have one GigaNet box that takes the T-series camera cable, so this cable is just a little bit wider than, for example, the MX series that we have down here at the bottom. So you just have to make sure that you plug the corresponding cable into the correct box. One thing to also take note is that there's a little red dot that you need to align on the camera, but not only the camera, also on the GigaNet box itself. So once you've plugged that into the GigaNet box, you're then free to unwind the cable around the other cameras to ensure that it's not in the way of when your athletes performing their action or movement. So as mentioned, when plugging the cable into the GigaNet box, it's exactly the same when plugging into the camera. So you just want to basically make sure that the red dot on the cable lines up with the red dot in the camera. Secondly, best practice is to try have one of these Velcro strips. What we try and do is wrap it around one section on the tripod, probably on one of the adjusters, and that's just to make sure that there's no tension on the back of the cable. So the next step is to place some markers over the capture area that the subject will be running through. So what I've done here is I've just placed 2 markers on each of the corners of the force platforms, and then what you can do is you can have a look on the Vicon Nexus software itself, and you can actually have a look through each camera's perspective, whereabouts that camera is pointing in relation to this marker setup. Okay, so once you've opened up Vicon, just make sure you're in the live mode in the top left. And then under the system resources pane, you can just select one of your cameras. Once you've done that, you can change from 3D perspective to camera, and then you can go through each of your cameras and just make sure that they're picking up all of the different markers that you've just placed down in the capture volume. Okay, so once you open Vicon Nexus, just make sure you're in live mode, and then under the systems pane, you can select all of your live cameras, change it, and then change it under the live window from 3D perspective to camera. Once you've done that, we can then apply our mask. So the masks basically just cover any kind of reflections that might be happening in the camera view. So as you can see, these small little green dots over here are just the other camera's reflections, and all we do is we hit start. Once all of those are covered in blue, we can hit stop. Alright, so once you have master cameras, the next step is to then calibrate. So if we just basically move down the order under calibrate cameras over here, all we do is we hit start, and then we have someone with the calibration wand that moves into the capture volume, which we'll show you next. Okay, so once you hit start on the calibration in Vicon Nexus, the next thing to do is obviously have the active one. So the one that we have here is just a 5 marker one, and it's the LED. So because we don't have the T60 series cameras, we're just going to leave this on continuous, not strobe. So what you want to do is you want to switch it on. Once you've got it on, you basically want to try and move the calibration wand through the exact volume area that your subject's going to be walking through. So for example, our subject's going to be running over the 4 platforms in this direction. So I want to basically make sure that I'm going across every single pixel, essentially, that the camera's going to pick up with the subject moving through. So once you've done the one calibration, Vicon Nexus will automatically create a 3D space. So the next point for you is to then provide it with the origin. So in order to do that, you take the calibration wand, obviously leaving it on, and you need to place it on the point at which you want the longitudinal axis to be either positive or negative. So in our case, if we're placing it on the force platforms over here, we want the Y or the longitudinal axis to be positive in the direction that they're running. So as you can see, these are cameras positioned around the wand, so the calibration one that we just used. So in reference to the actual lab floor, we can see that there's obviously, there needs to be calibrated back to the origin. So in order to do that, we go back under the tools pane, and under set volume origin, you hit start, and then set origin, and it'll reflect the lab cameras in relative to the wand placement. So that was part 1 of the Vicon camera setup. Part 2 will involve the marker placement as well as subject calibration, and then we'll move on to part 3, which will be a live trial.